one of the Trump supporters' campaign slogans that they yelled was "Drain the swamp." This is what the Trump supporters and the Republicans supposed to have been about. This is what the maga movement was supposed to be about. However, those same people who wanted to drain the swamp of so-called corruption is supporting the Republican Party and is voting in Republicans who support the corruption and is defending the corruption of the Supreme Court. What happened to the drain the swamp? See, it's never been about drain the swamp.
Under my administration, we're fighting against the lobbyists, the special interests, and the corrupt Washington politics. We are going to Washington, D.C., and we are going to drain the swamp. Michael Cohen, the president.
However, that policy changes when it's people who they favor. Corruption is okay. When you look at the corruption of his son-in-law being the ambassador to the Middle East for America at the same time receiving $2 trillion or $2 billion or something like that in funding from the Saudis, or you look at the Supreme Court justices, what's going on with them and them taking bribes from the elites. See, the drain the swamp concept has completely left. You have to understand that they only want to uphold the other side to the rule of law, not themselves and those who they feel will empower or support them, which is white Christian nationalists. About placing people in political positions that would do the bidding of white people and work in behalf of white supremacy. It was never about corruption. Those very same people who talk about draining the swamp are opposed to taking the political money out of politics. Those same very people who talk about drain the swamp of corruption, right, are the very same people who put these politicians in office who are protecting the corruption that has been revealed by the Supreme Court, who are fighting to prevent the Supreme Court from being held to any standards or having to have consequences if they violate their ethics. You have to understand that these people are not about just and unjust, right and wrong. These people are about power and oppression. This is what they're promoting. They're promoting to empower a group of people that will oppress you over them. Ethics, rules of law, corruption, none of these things mean anything to these Europeans who support these racist Republicans. And these racist Republicans know they do not have to appease or service their own voters as long as they support the destruction and the downfall of a black community. To maintain the support of a white populist group, all these Republicans know they need to do is to promote hatred. They do not have to promote any policy.
The growing scrutiny around our Supreme Court. The Senate Judiciary Committee had a hearing today on reforming the court's ethics and code of conduct after multiple damning reports. ProPublica found Justice Clarence Thomas did not disclose ultra-luxury travel bankrolled by a billionaire Texas developer. Thomas also apparently sold his mother's home to that very same developer. Politico reported Justice Neil Gorsuch sold property he owned to the head of a major law firm, a firm that often does business with the court. And Business Insider found Chief Justice Roberts' wife made millions and millions of dollars as a consultant for several law firms, some that have cases at the court. The Chief Justice RSVP'd no to the hearing, and no other justices even showed. Today, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Dick Durbin made his feelings about all of this abundantly clear.
Ethics cannot simply be left to the discretion of the nation's highest court. The court should have a code of conduct with clear and enforceable rules, so both justices and the American people know when conduct crosses the line. The highest court in the land should not have the lowest ethical standards. That reality is driving a crisis in public confidence in the Supreme Court. The status quo must change.
Throughout the hearing, the party lines were crystal clear.
This is an unseemly effort by the Democratic left to destroy the legitimacy of the Roberts Court. And if you want to talk about...
The courts destroyed their own legitimacy, but the Supreme Court never had no legitimacy with black people. If black people ever believed that there was any justice coming from the Supreme Court, then you are fooled. If you believe that they ever had any integrity, then you are foolish, because the Supreme Court never had no integrity. Some of the worst rulings they had was all the way back to the 1800s. You have to understand the Supreme Court ruled the Dred Scott case, which ruled that the black man had no rights that the white man had to respect. You got to understand that the United States Supreme Court upheld slavery multiple times. So you have to understand that that court has no validity. It has no ethics. It has no it's not a system of justice. It has never been. It was always been a system used in order to empower a wicked group of people to use the law to oppress the rest of its citizens. This has always been the case with the Supreme Court, and white people are supporting this Lindsey Graham. See, you can't leave it down to just some white people. When white people vote and support a person who is promoting and protecting the corruption of the highest courts in the land, you got to hold these white voters accountable for this. You have to accept that this is who these white people are.
Making the court a better institution, I'll be glad to work with in that regard. If you want to talk about destroying the court, count me out.
So what is so hard for them to adopt a code that every other court has to abide by?
Very directly, this is a political campaign designed to smear Justice Clarence Thomas. Only Supreme Court.
These people are sleazy. You have to understand, Justice Clarence Thomas did this to himself. He hid these actions because he knew they were unjust. He knew what they were. Nobody else told him to take those trips. Nobody else told him to have this person buy his mother's house for his mother to live there rent-free. Nobody else did that but Clarence Thomas. So nobody can smear Clarence Thomas on that but Clarence Thomas' actions. See, this is what white people are. They do not like to be held accountable for their actions. And I say that even though it's in protection of a so-called black man, but this black man has ruled in order to protect white supremacy his entire time on court. He was a puppet for white people. Black people opposed him just the same as we do Tim Scott. See, white people always go and find that sellout black that will say and do anything to hurt and harm his own people. And then try to make it look, if I'm not racist, look, Clarence Thomas, my friend. Clarence Thomas hate his own people.
Court justices refuse to allow their conduct to be investigated or reviewed.
Today's hearing is an excuse to sling more mud at an institution that not all, some Democrats don't like because they can't control it 100% of the time.
The public confidence in the United States Supreme Court has plummeted. A lot of the American public are increasingly seeing justices as politicians in robes.
For black people in the 19th century, the question of whether they were or could ever be, citizens of the United States was part of a decade-long court battle that centered on the circumstances of a black man named Dred Scott. Dred Scott was an enslaved black man who was living in Missouri. Historians estimate that he was born into slavery around the start of the 19th century in Southampton County, Virginia, and his enslaver was a man named Peter Blow. Scott was eventually purchased by an army surgeon named John Emerson, who moved Scott from the enslaved state of Missouri to the free state of Illinois, and then again to the free territory of Wisconsin. There, Scott met and married his wife, Harriet Robinson. So in 1846, Dred Scott filed a suit for his freedom in a St. Louis district court. His claim was based on Missouri law and precedent that if an enslaved person was relocated to a free state or territory, they were then considered free, and thus they couldn't be re-enslaved upon entering a slave state. And since John Emerson had taken Dred Scott to live in both Illinois and the Wisconsin territory at various points, both of which were free domains, it seemed like they had a pretty good case. After a bit of back and forth, Dred Scott did eventually win his family's freedom in 1850, but the case got appealed to Missouri's Supreme Court, which ruled against the lower court's decision while noting, quote, "Times now are not as they were when the former decisions on the subject were made." Dred Scott and his family were sent back into slavery, but Scott kept going. He received assistance from local abolitionists.
This shows you how the law wavers based off of politics from day one. They're saying your freedom and humanity wavers based off of public opinion. That would be the judgment made that the judges are making. So that tells you there's no moral compass in their judiciary system.
The case eventually found its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. But once the case got there, things, to put it mildly, did not go well. The Supreme Court didn't buy Scott's arguments, and the justices sided 7-2 with Sanford. Chief Justice Roger Taney wrote in the majority opinion that Scott did not have the standing to sue because enslaved African Americans weren't citizens of the United States. And if that wasn't enough, Justice Taney stated that even free black people in the North could never be considered citizens. He wrote that black people, quote, "are not included and were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution, and can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which that instrument provides for and secures to citizens of the United States."
Therefore, the Supreme Court never had validation with me. There was never a situation where I felt that their judgment was valid with me. They never had integrity. It has always been a separation from me from white people. This is why. This is their mentality. This is their thought process towards me as a black man. And this is how America has continued to treat me as a black man. And the Supreme Court has made no significant rulings to alter these laws. In legal ruling, in legal standings, that is called good law because it has never been overruled. That is standing law.
Stated that when the Constitution was framed and adopted, black people, quote, "had no rights which the white man was bound to respect."